Hello, it's good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today as we are all gathered here to talk about some really important work that is happening in this community in Ramsey County and the city of St. Paul and the surrounding suburbs. I think one of the most important things in order to make sure that we are keeping our public safe and ensuring good outcomes in our justice system is collaboration. People, leaders coming together, and then also really being intentional about utilizing tools that have been given to us. And so what we're here today to talk about is the actual implementation of a really important piece of legislation that our Minnesota legislature passed very recently, and the law became effective at the beginning part of this year. It's the Extreme Risk Protection Order legislation. I think Minnesota was the 21st state to enact this statute. But as we have researched how states have actually utilized this statute, I think we as a community and as a state can go either of two ways. One is to be very passive about the passage, admire the fact that a law was passed, and let these situations just passively come to us. And the reality is that in those types of situations and states, we are not going to be making a lot of progress. Or we can collectively come together, recognize that this is an important tool, that it's central to our mission to keep our public safe, and knowing all the things that we know about mental health and the prevalence of guns in our society, that we can use this new tool and be intentional about it. So I think that's the actual first step in what we're trying to do today. And so we just came, many of us here came from a really important convening and training of professionals, not just law enforcement, but social workers, victim advocates, to start that process of collaborating and also developing kind of, and there's been a lot of work that has been done for over the past year since this law was enacted, but today was kind of the first countywide training to make sure that people understand what everybody is doing, and most importantly, from my perspective as the county attorney, to make sure that we are going to be using this law to its fullest extent. So one of the things that we're announcing today as a part of the county attorney's office is that as cases are being presented to our office for felony consideration, and in some cases we don't charge those cases because there might not be enough evidence, right? But we are asking all law enforcement agencies who present cases to us to fill out a checklist, and one of those things will be about whether or not the use of an extreme risk protection order is appropriate. And if so, then my office will take the initiative to file that petition to get that process moving. We've also today will be distributing a number of brochures for the public because the law allows for family members and certain others to be a part of this process. And we're going to build out even more structures and protocols around how we get information about things that happen like in the civil commitment court, and just there's so many places and situations that we want to be really intentional about how we receive this information, and then most importantly, make sure that when we receive that information, we're actually going to do something about it. And we do this in partnership, we do it together. And today, as a part of this convening and training, we had Chris Carita, who has an enormous wealth of wisdom and experience because Florida, he comes from the state of Florida, from Broward County. And now he's consulting with communities all across this country on implementing our ERPO laws. But he just comes with great wisdom and experience about how Florida and other parts of this country have used this law to actually save lives. If you actually do a Google search and just type in ERPOs and save lives, you will come up with all of these various studies that show that in California, in Florida, all these places around the country, that the effective and coordinated use of this tool can actually save lives and avoid and prevent tragedies. As a part of our work, one of the things that we're doing also is to make sure that we are being helpful to all law enforcement agencies as well as our public. And I want to thank Senior Prosecutor, Assistant County Attorney Don Bax, who has been assigned since the beginning of this year, who has been doing all of this research, has been working with Chris Carita and all of the law enforcement agencies in the county to develop their own practices and protocols, and she will be the one that will be bringing these petitions on behalf of the public and working with law enforcement moving forward. And we also have a great partnership here with all of our city attorneys. I'm so grateful that Lindsay Olson is here as well to talk about the work that they have been doing since the beginning of this year as well. So our next speaker today is Chris Carita, who is going to share some of the information that he shared to over 150 professionals that were convened today at the Neighborhood House to get a better understanding and put into practice what we're going to be doing moving forward. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to thank Ramsey County Attorney Choi for inviting me out. I'm deeply honored to be called out to Minnesota to be helping implement the programs here in Ramsey County. And I am deeply encouraged to see this kind of proactive approach that Ramsey County is taking in implementing their ERPO programs. You know, many states across the country pass these laws, and they end up being sort of a tool that sits in the background. There's not a lot, and different police departments treat it as something that, okay, well, it's good we have it. We'll worry about it if we need it. The problem with that is when no one takes responsibility for moving it forward, that's exactly what happens. You wait until there's a tragedy where you needed it, and then you're not prepared to use it properly. I think there have been issues and incidents of that across the country, and I'm very happy to see that Ramsey County is trying to avoid just such a circumstance. They're working tremendously well with their partners here throughout the county, with resources at the state, at the Department of Public Safety, and I applaud their efforts in rolling out their ERPO program here. Something that we talked about, some of the things that I really am happy to see specifically in the law here in Minnesota is that, you know, gun violence in this country is actually driven more by suicide than by homicide. And that's not a widely known fact. In fact, throughout the country, it's about 2 to 1. 2/3 of gun violence deaths are actually suicides. And in the state of Minnesota, it's closer to 3 to 1. It's almost 75% suicide driven. And with that in mind, the Minnesota legislature thought to put into this law an extra caveat that allows judges to seal cases where the person receiving the ERPO has only made threats of self-harm. So in other words, if a family member is suffering a mental health crisis and threatening to take their own lives, a judge has the option to seal those cases and keep them from public view, which helps maintain the dignity of a person who is likely going through a mental health crisis and needs to seek help. I think that's also going to lower barriers for family members engaging the process, knowing that they are not going to make public what is often a very private and a very painful situation in their home. Some other things that we talked about are ERPO's broader utility in intervening in domestic violence cases. So, you know, domestic violence protection orders in many states, when there's been pushback, people will say things like, well, we already have domestic violence protection orders. We don't need ERPO. Well, the speed with which ERPO can be used and the precision in removing firearms from those situations early on in the case helps make the situation safer for victims of domestic violence to then engage the justice system and get a protection order or engage with a criminal prosecution. By us taking the lead and making the situation safer and removing those deadly means, we are making it safer and making our other systems work more efficiently to prevent a tragedy. And then finally, I just want to touch on this, and I think you know the Ramsey County Attorney Choi has really embodied this in the way that he is rolling this program out here. You know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So if we can work diligently to prevent these tragedies, every gun violence death has a ripple effect in our communities and in our families. And every gun violence death that we can prevent is not just saving the life of the respondent or the people that he or she might plan to harm. It is saving our communities from the trauma that we see in the news all too often. It's saving the family members of that respondent from the heartache of the loss of their loved one. And I think it is so incredibly encouraging that Ramsey County is taking that to heart and really embodying that in their implementation. So I'm so grateful to be part of this and able to assist in any way I can in the rollout here, and I look forward to continuing to assist in any way I can. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Chris. Next, we'll hear from our St. Paul City Attorney, Lindsay Olson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. As many of you know, these ERPOs, the Extreme Risk Protection Orders, are a critical tool in preventing someone's access to firearms where there's a significant danger to themselves or others. And building off of what Chris just said, I think for people who are concerned in their family, in their immediate circle, this is a tool that's available to people in households, people in families, and people need to know that they can instigate a conversation with a victim witness advocate, with an advocacy organization, with St. Paul Police, with the county attorney, with the St. Paul City Attorney's Office, with any of us, to simply say, I am concerned that there is a risk for my loved one, and that's going to be the focus of this entire process, is safeguarding that individual or that family and a person who has access to firearms where there is a concern. And the opportunity for us to all partner together to help ensure that community safety. I appreciate everyone being here today to get that word out, because this is a new tool, and we've all worked hard as a justice collaboration to come together with similar policies so people understand what it is, help make it clear. John Choi's office has a great brochure that people can take and just really help understand those simple steps so that they're not wondering, what are my options? How can I help my loved one? Is there something out there that doesn't simply criminalize this risk? This is a civil tool, so that the focus is on removing that gun from a person who might harm someone when there might not be any other criminal activity present in a certain situation. So I want to specifically thank John Choi's office for taking the lead in coordinating the efforts. I appreciate the Minnesota Coalition as well for coming together statewide to help get the word out and really do collaboration as a state. As Chris has said, we've really tried to be proactive in Minnesota and specifically in the Twin Cities in partnering on this for everyone's public safety, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Next, we have our Deputy Chief Josh Legault from St. Paul Police Department.
Thank you. Good afternoon. From a municipal law enforcement perspective, the Extreme Risk Protection Order legislation provides us a new opportunity to promote the public safety for me and my officers in the city of St. Paul, but it's available throughout the state of Minnesota. When traditionally in law enforcement, we're able to take property as evidence related to criminal actions. But in these circumstances, we're allowed to identify problems that exist. We can articulate our knowledge of the danger posed with weapons remaining in person's possession, and then take steps with the steadfast support of our city attorney's office and the county attorney's office to remove those weapons from a location where they can cause harm. It's an opportunity that we look forward to using, and it is also another tool available to your St. Paul police officers to protect public safety. Thank you to Chris for sharing your experience in Florida. It's inspiring to me to hear that it works, and we have a path that we're going to move forward as an agency in collaboration with our law enforcement partners to make this a reality in our community. Thank you.
Last but not least, our sheriff.
Thanks for the not least.
Yeah.
I was worried you were saying only the Florida people were wise earlier. This is about preventing tragedy. It can't be stated loud enough. This whole concept is to prevent tragedy. time and time again, when we have incidents like this, and I'll throw the Minneapolis case as a classic example, but we see dozens, if not hundreds of these nationwide, where after the tragedy occurs, we go back and look at the police reports, the evidence, we talk to family members, and they say, well, we tried to warn people, we called the police, we told you what was going to happen, or we knew there was a problem, but we really didn't know, how to handle it properly. So part of this is an educational aspect of letting the community know that we are here to listen and hear what's going on in your circle of knowledge. And to be frank, that's probably as important as anything to get people to tell us what's happening, because it's no secret mental health has dramatically, exploded here. The calls we're going to on a day-to-day basis with people with mental illness is dominating our police work now, and I'm sure Josh would confer. It's coded as a person in crisis. I cannot remember a time in my career where it was as dominated our police work as it does now. And so our job is to be smart and to think ahead and figure out where the next tragedy is going to occur. This law and the work done by John Choi's office puts us in a position to be able to do that. Now, there are always those people, I'm sure you have questions about, well, how many are we talking about? It's such a small number of people that cause our public safety crisis, whether it's criminals, gang members, or people that are involved in mass shootings. The number is very, very small, and even in this category, it's even smaller. But our job in law enforcement is to find and identify the potential problems to the community. And this will help us. This is a great tool to help us do that as we move forward. And John, thank you for your work there.
Thank you, Sheriff. So, questions?
We have obviously time for questions, and if there's one that you want to direct specifically to somebody, just call that out. But let's start with.
You mentioned something about looking at all the felony cases. Can you talk a little bit more about that, about what that looks like? Is that something that is new?
Yeah, so thank you for that. Every day, law enforcement, people call 911 and they're going to go out to certain situations, right? And they're going to secure the situation, and then if there's potentially a crime that's been committed, law enforcement is going to do an investigation, right? And they're going to present us a case. So, like, for instance, it could be a felony terroristic threats case, right? We want to be very intentional, and we want to put into a checklist process that, in addition to gathering the facts about the felony terroristic threats case, like maybe the major fact is I'm going to kill you, tomorrow, right? We also want to make sure that we're asking the witnesses, other family members, and doing an investigation about whether or not this person has access to guns. Maybe the fact scenario wasn't, he didn't make a threat with a gun, but we should be asking, does this person have a gun? And also, obviously, the underlying nature of this particular crime of terroristic threats is, potentially an extreme dangerous situation. So we want all of that information gathered. And then let's just say that it wasn't that's not what was said, but it was something less than that, and it's not a crime. We still want that case presented to us. So we're going to prosecute the case, but at the same time, maybe there's a way to get an ERPO petition as well, because maybe they could work in concert with each other. But also, too, for that situation where we can't charge the case because there's just simply not enough evidence, we want to know about that so that Dawn Baxt can receive that information, work with law enforcement, and in those cases, we will file an ERPO, we'll use the civil tool, right? So this is how we kind of create this new protocol of investigation. The information comes to us. We've actually dedicated staff resource to do this. And the county attorney's office will do this for our suburban partners as well. So if there's even a misdemeanor case and they need assistance, we will help them, right? In St. Paul, I believe they'll be able to work on within their own office and support their police department. So we want to have this all hands-on deck approach, using every possible situation and scenario, and thinking about what Sheriff Fletcher just talked about, making sure that we don't miss anything, right? And then creating those practices and protocols to be in place, get the training out there. So I think that's one big area, just because 911, people call 911, and there's bad things that happen in a community, right? But there's another bigger issue too, which is about making sure that other stakeholders and professionals are trained, like psychologists, social workers, people who are dealing with people with mental illness, right? Actually, there's a requirement on the part of those professionals to make a report. So we believe that the best practice would be to report that to law enforcement, and then those situations they could themselves petition for an ERPO, or they could ask us for assistance. But we're going to, develop those really clear policies. And the bottom line is, I think if there's a policy for all of us, it's helpfulness. We're going to help each other. We're going to cooperate, and at the end of the day, do everything that we can to prevent tragedies from happening, and look at our work as potential homicide or suicide prevention.
Ask a follow-up. Yep. Just one follow-up. So it sounds like this is to work. Sometimes the judicial process can take a little bit of time. It sounds like this is something that can be done while that process is going through, to maybe take a weapon away,
Right.
while you're waiting for maybe a court case to move forward. Is that right?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I think part of this is trying to move as quickly as we can, but we got to follow the laws. But just having this dual approach, I think, is a really powerful thing. And today we heard there's some great examples, I think, in Florida as well, about just making sure that you're covering all these situations.
And I do want to mention, sometimes criminal
Yeah, come on.
Well, I want to say to your question, really, sometimes criminal prosecution is impossible. And clearly it takes a long time to work it through the process. There are going to be times that the facts exist to suggest that that weapon is a danger to the person or the community, but you may not have enough facts to actually prosecute them for a felony.
So Sheriff, if I can follow up on that then, so say under that circumstance, how fast can this weapon be removed from wherever, home, work, I mean, is this a date turn thing once you
Yeah.
file a petition?
I'm going to have the legality issue addressed by Chris, but there's a secondary issue for us, which is somewhat problematic, is actually physically removing the weapon, but you address the legal part first.
So once everything is set, once all the policies are set, in Florida, you could get an ERPO in hand within hours. So similarly to a search warrant, the process is actually very similar. An officer is presenting a sworn affidavit of the fact supporting the ERPO, similar to what would be in a search warrant. The threshold is similar in that it's probable cause, and you would present that to a judge, sometimes telephonically, and they would fax you or email you that you could get it sent back to you while you're on scene. So we've had situations where we are on scene with an unfolding crisis. We learn that there are firearms in the home, that the person is a danger to themselves or others. And if they're not cooperative, we would hold the scene similarly to the way we would in a criminal case, contact the on-call judge, start the process for the ERPO, and get it served while we're still on scene. So we hold what we have, we keep our officers safe, we keep the community safe, we're avoiding a second confrontation down the road, and it can be done very efficiently and very effectively. Now, but that brings up just one other point that I want to make. That is a confrontational situation. That's a situation where the person is not cooperative, right? What we are seeing, at least in Broward County generally, and I think in Florida generally, is that the vast majority of these risk protection orders, as they're called in Florida, so the vast majority of our ERPOs are served and the respondent is compliant or even stipulates to the order. In other words, they don't challenge the order. They understand the behaviors that brought us there. They understand the purpose of the order and that it's not punitive. The idea is to keep them safe and the community around them safe. And they comply with the order, and it gives them the opportunity to get any help they might need or any counseling they might need. So the vast majority of our ERPOs are served peacefully and the respondent cooperates. It's actually very rare that they're confrontational. But there are mechanisms in the law built to address just that as well.
What the challenges been so far in implementing this in Ramsey County?
I think it's, because this is something that I want everybody to report, because I want you to hold us accountable, and I want you to hold the Metro accountable as well. Because we've had a little over 100 ERPOs that have been filed in this state. The vast majority of them are in greater Minnesota. In fact, in Ramsey County, there's only been 3. I'm not sure exactly what the number is in Hennepin, but I know that there was 0 in Minneapolis. And I really think that, I think the gun violence issues are going to be different across the state, but I really want our community and our broader community to be really intentional about using this tool, because after I have heard from what Chris just said about the experience in Florida, and then just learning about what others have been doing in California and just other places where this law has been enacted, but then also effectively implemented, it's really clear to me that if there's leadership and people are being intentional about its use, and you build out the resources and all of those things, we can actually save lives. I really believe that. And so I'm trying to get to a community and to a world where our public is educated about this issue and that they can use it. But if they contact us in the government, that we are there ready, able to help, and see this as our responsibility to, again, do everything that we can to prevent tragedies and death.
Can I ask a follow-up? I mean, with the 3 having been filed in Ramsey County, was because of certain charges, or why was it?
I think it's just a relatively new law, and you'll see even with the communities across this country that have been aggressively or proactively trying to implement this, it takes a while. In fact, for many, like in California, it took years. And sadly, it's usually because, I mean, oftentimes these laws are enacted because of tragedies, and then nobody does anything to enforce these laws, and then another tragedy occurs, and then people start asking questions, why didn't you do something, right? And then all of a sudden you see these numbers spike up. And so I have some of this data from like Santa Clara County and other places around the country where you can just see the use of these ERPOs just skyrocket. And it's usually because it's a response to an incident. We don't want to be that community. We want to have the foresight to know that this is within our responsibility as being a good government and a responsive government. So that's the type of community that we aspire to be. So we're still in that novel phase of building this out. But believe me, since the beginning of this year, everybody up here and all the agency we have been in partnership and collaboration, developing written policies and protocols, and today was our first kind of massive training. And there's going to be more. It's not just we're going to stop. We're going to keep doing this, because today was a lot of professionals, but a lot of law enforcement. But we got to talk to people in our schools. We got to talk to people in our counseling community, right? So that they're very clear about what they should be doing. In fact, they actually have an obligation to do something. And so we want to make sure that we're building that out. So that's going to take a little bit of time, but we are absolutely committed to doing this as quickly as possible.
How does the process work? Is the law enforcement officer on the scene the first person to make this recommendation, or does it just depend on the case? And I guess in Florida, what have you seen
Yeah.
the majority of those cases be?
There's so many situations, and I think that's where Chris can talk about that, yeah.
So in Florida, it's only law enforcement. It's law enforcement driven. They're the only law enforcement can be the petitioner for an ERPO. So it's a little different. In other jurisdictions where family members and clinicians, in some states they allow school staff to be the direct petitioner, or even employers. What we're seeing state to state is that about 90% of the ERPOs are still being filed by law enforcement, even in states where others can file. And the only outlier for that really is Maryland right now, and that's shifting. But Maryland put a lot of resources into making making extra resources available to civilians to file ERPOs. So their process is very open, and they've been very intentional in that. But it's taken them, years to get to that point. That's in the last couple of years that they've really built out their civilian support for ERPO. For ERPO petitions. The process is actually very straightforward. It's very straightforward. So let's say we have an officer responds to a scene, responds to a call. Let's say there's a mental health crisis and a person is threatening either themselves or threatening to harm others with their firearms in the house. The officer in that scenario could, reach directly, could, through their own policy, fill out an affidavit. So they would fill out the facts of the case in compliance with the state statute. So they'd outline the behavior that they're observing on scene that gives them cause to believe that the person is a danger to themselves or others for having firearms. They would send that petition to a judge. The on-call judge would review the evidence presented and decide whether or not to issue an emergency order. And that can all be done on scene. More often than not, in these scenarios, the person is still being taken into custody, whether there's a criminal charge or there's a mental health concern and they're being evaluated under the mental health laws of the state. That gives you a little more time and a little more leeway to investigate further and present a stronger case to a judge. But that's also why there are ex parte emergency orders and full orders. So that ex parte order is meant to move quickly and meant to respond to an imminent threat, whereas the hearing 2 weeks later is meant to be a more broad hearing. So you'll have completed a full investigation, present all that evidence, and a judge will make a final determination on whether or not to issue the final 6-month or 1-year order. I hope that answers the question.
Let me jump in there just for a minute on it from a practical. Is that okay, John?
Yeah, absolutely.
Most of the time, we are going to either suicidal calls, mental health crises that may not be suicidal, but the person's acting in a way that's a crisis, or a domestic situation. Those are the 3 situations that we're normally called for. But I want to say that in the suicidal case, I mean, the officers have a lot going on when they're there. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces to this. They may not get time to go in and search the whole house for guns. The party is transported by the medics down to regions for a mental health review. They may not be charged. Usually a suicidal party is not a part of the criminal case. And they will probably be released anytime from 24 to 72 hours after they are reviewed. Our mental health system doesn't hold many people. Some of them are already previously incompetent, and the state has no place to put them. So they're going to get back to their house in a 3 to 4 day window. And that's a critical time for us to figure out, are there guns or something of danger? And to be honest with you, Mario asked the question, we haven't really been digging into that issue in the past. This really is because of John's leadership, and it takes focus and leadership and direction that we're going to start doing that to break down. So the other part is the domestic part. This is another safety net. We're strengthening the safety net for victims of domestic abuse. Because time and time again, this has happened where we have a series of domestics, and then we're responding to a homicide that someone has been shot. So, the burden's on us to deliver, but we're asking you to help the public make us aware as well. Thank you.
I just want to
Lindsay
say,
wanted to add something.
yeah, I've been wanting to say something, which is, this is also a partnership with community, because specifically with regard to mental health, and as Chris said, that by far outweighs homicide in terms of the numbers of gun deaths, and that's true here in Minnesota. And there are a vast majority of those situations where police are not called until the person has already died or shot someone else and killed themselves. And this is a preventative tool that can be used not just within the system when those things are happening, when there's a current crisis, and we're all real committed to making sure that we're all using those tools, but we're also dependent on those family members, those loved ones, those people in the community that are seeing this person, that are hearing someone have a suicidal ideation, that are seeing warning signs, that are aware of domestic violence, even at a time when there isn't a current crisis that requires someone to call law enforcement, where they can come and say, here's what's happening, there's this risk, we heard about this tool, we're concerned. And then we can all be proactive in assisting that family and that individual so that we're saving lives, as John has said. And I just want to make that really clear, because we're focusing a lot on the responsibility that we all have, and we do, but we also really depend on that community support and that trust and that cooperation, where people understand that coming forward and saying, I'm seeing this risk, I'm seeing my loved one in a potential crisis, I know there are guns in the house, that this is a civil tool. And, you know, there often are times where someone might be arrested, something may happen, but we all want to prevent that. And we now have a civil tool that we can really prevent these things from happening, where someone doesn't have to have a criminal charge, someone doesn't have to get harmed.
Are there any other counties or communities that are taking a similar approach? And also second part is, are you hoping that maybe this framework that you're building could be used and copied by other communities across the state?
I don't know the answer to that question about other counties, but I do know this, and Commissioner Bob Jacobson was a part of our convening this morning. And so he's, I think, very much responsible for supporting just the entire state. And as you know, there's been already about 100 of these that have been filed, and they are working in collaboration with law enforcement, doing lots of convenings and planning trainings they've already done, and they will continue to do throughout the year. And Commissioner Jacobson is very committed to that. But I think also too, like a lot of times, the cooperation and where the relationships really pay off are at the local agency level. And so if there's anybody in this state that's not doing that, they should be, because this is what we're doing, because we just know within our DNA that building good relationships, coordinating together, and building out training is really the key to making this all work. And I know, Chris, that was part of your message today, so I don't know if you want to speak on that.
Yeah. So across the board, state to state, agency to agency, when there have been missed opportunities, it more often than not goes back to a lack of training and a bit of a lack of foresight. At the very beginning, it's difficult to roll out training for an entire department. It's difficult to train individuals to be experts in this and to take lead on this. But again, what I'm seeing here in Ramsey County and from St. Paul PD in the Sheriff's Office, and this collaboration is really encouraging. But yeah, training your entire department and making that training available to our partners, so to mental health clinicians who have an obligation to notify law enforcement when there's a situation that might require an ERPO. Making domestic violence centers and advocates aware that this is another available tool. You know, working with all of our partners and creating as much scaffolding around this process, this implementation, is going to pay dividends, and it's going to save lives. And it's incredibly important that the people who are most affected or most likely to be affected by gun violence, or who are already in the field trying to intervene in dangerous situations, are acutely aware that this is available and know how to engage the system to get an ERPO when they need one.
We'll do one final wrap up with Mara, and then we'll finish up.
I was just wondering, does the Sheriff's Office, St. Paul Police, or other law enforcement in Ramsey County have officers or investigators working on these, like Mr. Choi did in Florida?
We do technically, but they have not been. Oh, well, I mean, that's what was so important. Josh Adams here is one of our commanders at the Sheriff's Office. He was at the training, as were many of our sheriff's deputies. So this was really the kickoff to help train them. They're aware of the state law, but they're really not aware of how the system is going to work. How many did you have today that you're trained?
50.
150 people, so it starts now.
So as far as St. Paul Police Department, I'd echo what the sheriff said, that our officers are generally aware of this opportunity. Through our Community Outreach Stabilization Unit, and Mental Health Unit, we have been working towards petitioning the courts. We've not yet filed one with District Court. Pat Cheshire, commander with our Gang and Gun Unit, is part of this as well. Generally speaking, the Gang and Gun Unit is, they further criminal investigations. And yet they have a specialized knowledge and awareness of firearm violence, and so we're working diligently to create a home for this thing. But that's not unique to a specific unit, but that all of our officers have access to and then can utilize.
And the county attorney's office put a clock here, right here, that they didn't want us to succeed. 1 o'clock, we've already passed that, so start smoking, yeah.
I want to thank everyone. One thing we brought up a couple times is a brochure. I've got copies
to this to take away if you wish. We will then send out, as we always do, an email in the next hour with all the information here, plus an extra couple of links for you for some of the research that John mentioned and a few other items. So thank you very much. I'll be around for any follow-up questions and connections.
I want to thank you for coming. Considering all the news that there's out there, that you took time to cover this initiative, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just go out that way.
Thank you.
Yeah.